Good evening. That was quite an impressive video, and I'm humbled that an organization of this caliber would have me to be a part of our time together this weekend. I want to specifically thank my friend Paul Murray for introducing me to the Global Peace Fellowship, and to honor God by recognizing God's presence with us on this day. I want to call your attention to a very familiar story to many. It's a story that I learned not from the Bible, I learned in school. I was in elementary school at a time when they still told Bible stories, and we learned all of the different religious tradition songs. And one of the songs that we learned was the song, Them Bones, Them Dry Bones, story of Ezekiel. And so I want to read it from the Hebrew Bible and suggest that it has some instruction for us as we think together this weekend about what it means to have global peace, what it means for us in this country to be about the business of renewal, because renewal suggests that you had something and you lost it. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, "Son of man, can these bones live?" I said, "Sovereign Lord, you alone know." Then he said to me, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord." So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, "Prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, son of man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breathe from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live." So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood upon their feet, a vast army. Lord, your people seek a word. Speak your truth, nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. In your name, amen. Ezekiel was trained to be a priest. He was trained to take care of people. He was part of the middle class. His career as a middle-class priest was just beginning to take off. He was in that mid-20s age where all of us think that we're going to be successful and change the world. When Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon, the king of Babylon, and his army took 10,000 of the professional class from Jerusalem and brought them to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was in the midst of taking over Jerusalem, taking over the Hebrews, putting them under his thumb. And the way that he did that was to cream off the best and the brightest and leave everybody else behind. And so now here comes this major shift in Ezekiel's career. He's no longer part of the Hebrew middle class. He's now part of an outcast race in a foreign land. And during the first 11 years that he spends in Babylon, he is sending word back to the Hebrews of how this captivity, this shift in political affairs, this removal of the middle class from their neighborhoods of origin is the direct result of two things. The first is that they've forgotten where they came from. They've forgotten their religious roots. They've forgotten that they lived in a nation that was formed and designed by God to be a city set upon a hill. They forgot that they were chosen uniquely to bring morality to the rest of the world. They forgot. The second thing that Ezekiel tells them in those 11 years from the time he gets to Babylon to the time that Nebuchadnezzar goes back and completely destroys Jerusalem. The second thing the second reason that they've been taken captive is because they become a nation of blood. He uses the phrase, it's not just that you're a violent nation, you love it. The King James Version says, your feet are swift to shed blood. You love killing, you love violence. This is a violent nation. It's so violent that our national holiday really shouldn't be the 4th of July. It should be Thanksgiving. Because the two things that Americans love to do are things that we do every Thanksgiving. We eat as much as we can, and then we watch people knock each other out. Big dinner and 3 football games characterize a nation of violence. When Jerusalem was completely destroyed, when the consequences of their violence and their forgetting their religious roots were manifest, Ezekiel's message now changed. Because he did not want the Hebrews to think that just because they were being disciplined, just because things were not going the way they had wanted them to, just because their politics had crumbled, that God had forgotten them. And so God gives Ezekiel a vision of renewal. Yes, it's been a bloody nation. Yes, they've forgotten their religious roots. They've forgotten their moral roots. They've forgotten their spiritual roots. But there is renewal coming. And so he takes this man, Ezekiel. God takes this man, Ezekiel, into a valley that is filled with bones. I don't know about you, but it's interesting to me that God puts his hand on somebody and then takes him down to a valley full of bones. You won't get that in today's TV preaching. You won't get that from contemporary evangelists who teach American prosperity as if it belongs to the Judeo-Christian tradition. They will tell you that when God puts his hand on you, it's to move you to the suburbs. When God puts his hand on you, it's to lead you to a luxury car dealership. When God puts his hand on you, it's to give you joy and it's to give you peace and excitement. But in this case, God puts his hand on Ezekiel and he takes him to the valley. No shouting. I come from a church where when the Lord gets a hold of you, you start shouting and dancing. There's no shouting in the valley. In fact, I question God, why take Ezekiel to the valley? Why take me to the valley? Why take you to the valley? I can find the valley very well by myself, thank you very much. There are valleys of my own making. But God takes us to the valley because we don't want to go. God takes us to the valley because it's a place of pain, a place of suffering. Ezekiel finds it a place that's very dry. I don't know anybody who, at the age of 25, which is about what Ezekiel was when he was taken captive, I don't know anybody at the age of 25 who says, when I get older, I'm going to the valley. When God takes you to the valley, it's sort of like, you know this, you know the footprint story, don't you? The footprint story, the man had a dream and there were 2 sets of footprints walking along the beach. And then when times got tough, there was only one set. And the man prayed and he said, God, what does this mean? He says, well, that's you and me walking together. And he said, but God, when times get hard, there's only one set of footprints. Did you leave me? And God says, no, I didn't leave you. Those were the times when I had to carry you. Well, Ezekiel had another vision. It's like two sets of footprints. And then when times get hard, there's this big, wide path. And then two sets of footprints and then a big, wide path. And I could hear Ezekiel saying to God, God, what does this mean? He says, it's two sets of footprints, you and me walking together on the beaches of life. He said, well, God, when times were hard, I see this big, wide path. And God says, those are the times I had to drag your butt. Sometimes God has to drag you to the valley, full of bones, full of death, full of destruction, very dry. They'd been there a long time. Their condition was labeled permanent by the coroner. Walking around amidst the poor, walking around amidst the infirm, walking around amidst the prisoners, walking around amidst people who are gripped by fear and don't believe that there is any hope. God has Ezekiel walk around in the midst of it. And then after Ezekiel has had his fill of this experience, God asks him a question. We translate it in some Bibles, Son of Man. It simply means servant. Can these bones live? Now, if Ezekiel has been watching television, he knows the right answer. The right answer is, oh, of course, if I have enough faith, these bones can live. Hallelujah. Because that's what the faith crowd will tell you. They'll tell you nothing's impossible with God. You can name it and claim it and frame it. You can blab it and grab it. You can have what you say. Religion is a formula. If you do the right things happen to you. But Ezekiel did not say yes. The doubters and the skeptics say no. They say these bones can't live. These kids can't learn. The sick can't get well. Prisoners will never be rehabilitated. Nations will never learn to live together. No. It won't happen. Ezekiel is not a skeptic, nor does he tread the ground of Pollyanna faith. His answer is profound. Son of man, servant, can these bones live? Lord God, thou knowest. I don't know the answer. I have enough sense to know that in my frail and finite mind, that the answer is not in my planning. The answer is not in my programming. The answer is not in my scheming. The answer is not in my textbooks, but the answer is in you. And because the answer is in you, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to stand here and see what the answer is. If you've asked me a question that I don't know the answer to, I'm going to say, Lord, you know. Next. God says, speak to the bones. But God, speaking to bones is not a very intelligent thing to do. There are some insects who have their hearing apparatus in their thigh, but humanity is Homo sapiens, and speaking to bones as opposed to ears makes absolutely no sense. I wasn't trained to speak to bones. I didn't go to priest seminary to speak to bones. I've never seen anywhere in the history of Israel where someone is speaking to bones, but it sounds a little strange, it sounds weird, but since you know the answer and now you're giving me instruction, I've already given you this situation, so I'm going to do what you tell me to do. I hope none of my seminary professors see me do this. I hope there are no cameras around. I hope the press is in another part of the valley. I hope nobody is going to tweet this. O ye dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. It didn't matter what anyone thought of what Ezekiel did. He did what he was told. This is what the sovereign Lord, the one who has the real answers, says to the bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make you flesh, and come upon you and cover you with skin. He's speaking to bones. Doesn't make much sense. With all the training, there's more degrees in this room than a thermometer. And with all the training, it doesn't make sense for you to embark on the kind of peacemaking missions in the midst of the valley of the dry bones. But if God said do it, then do it. If the Creator has sent you to the valley of the dry bones, then go. I have a friend named Al Muhammad. Al Muhammad runs a series of businesses on the worst block in Irvington, New Jersey. His daughter, Bahia Muhammad, teaches with me at Howard University. We both have a strong interest in working with the families of the incarcerated. So she said, next time you're in Jersey, I want you to go by my father's restaurant and get something to eat. It's on the house. So, on the house is about what I can afford. And I went to Al's restaurant. And so we got to the restaurant, we went inside, and we placed our order. And then he said, step into my office. I began to walk toward the back of the restaurant, and he said, no, this way. We went outside, and he leaned on the mailbox. He said, you're a Christian, aren't you? I said, yeah. He said, I'm a Muslim. But here's something we both know, that light shines the darkest, light shines the brightest in the darkest place. And that's why I put my restaurant here. Because this is the poorest block in Irvington. That's why this is my office. Because as long as this is my office, I get to meet the drug dealers. I get to meet the prostitutes. This is my office. And you know what else he said to me? He said, now those are my children in there running the restaurant. One was 15, one was 16. I said, they work in your restaurant? He said, no, they run it. I said, why do your children run the restaurant? He said, my children, he called them my babies. He said, my babies run the restaurant so that no adult will have any excuse. If they can see a 15 and a 16-year-old, they're not just serving the food, they do inventory. They keep the books. They do all of the work. In fact, all of my children have to own their own business before they go to college. And all of them go to college. All 20 of them have gone to college. Well, 18, there's 2 still home. He understands what it's like to set up shop in the valley of the dry bones and to create life in young people in a neighborhood where nobody thinks a young person has a chance, let alone an adult. You know how the story ends, at least how it ends in the spiritual. Then Ezekiel prophesies, the bones come together. But that's why the Negro spiritual is no substitute for the text. Because while the song ends with the bones coming together, the text isn't finished. Because Ezekiel looks at the bones, and they're all together. The neck bone's connected to the, whatever this is, the spine bone. That's not in the song. I don't know. But Ezekiel looks and he says, they're organized, but there's no breath. That word breath in Hebrew is ruach. And it doesn't just mean breath, it means wind. That's why God says prophesy to the wind. But it also means spirit. Ruach is wind, ruach is breath, ruach is spirit. When God tells Ezekiel to prophesy to the spirit, to the wind, he's actually telling Ezekiel to prophesy to God. Talk to me, send me into the mix, I know everything's organized, but you can have everything organized, and if there's no spirit, it's dead. A cemetery is the most organized place in the world. And so as we work, as we do what we are told, as we carry out the words of the prophecy, we have to also call upon God. And when the Spirit comes into these life forms, these organized life forms, the text says, now they're an army. See, most of us look at this text and we see a rescue. Saving folk, getting them up out of the valley. But this text is not about rescue. It's about a regiment. Because the young people that you reach with this message become an army of hope, not an army that carries guns, but an army that carries peace. Not an army bent on destroying other folk, but an army bent on loving other folk. Not an army bent on destruction, but an army bent on redemption. The valley of the dry bones is a theater, it's an arena within which God works redemptive purposes and says that which is dead as the result of our forgetting, as the result of our bloodletting, that valley that we have created through our own negligence and our own self-centeredness, can be the very place of redemption and building a regiment in the midst of a place that once was dead. There was a town in the 19th century in north central Georgia called Marthasville. Marthasville was a very poor town. That's where the trash lived. Up the road from Marthasville was a thriving community named Decatur. Decatur had nice colonial houses with white picket fences. It was the hub of northern Georgia. And so when they built the railroad in the late 1800s to go through North Georgia, they had to go through Decatur. The city father said, we want the railroad. Because we are Decatur, we are important, bring us the railroad. And so they built the railroad through Decatur. And Decatur thrived even more. Till one day people began coming outside and looking at their white picket fences and noticing that the soot from the locomotives that had been belching when the trains were stopped at the Decatur train station was going up into the air and then descending on their fences, descending on their walls. And they said, maybe having the train isn't such a good thing here. You know, we had nice, clean houses, we had a nice, clean environment, and now this train is belching smoke all over the place. We don't want the train here anymore. There's a poor town down the road, a piece called Marthasville. Let's put the train station down there. Then it'll be close enough for us to get to, but we don't have to deal with the smoke. Well, the folks in Marthasville didn't have much say in the matter. But a strange thing happened. The people who owned the railroad began bringing business to Marthasville. Stores and businesses, schools, grew in Marthasville. In fact, Marthasville grew so well that today you call it Atlanta. The stone that the builders rejected became the chief cornerstone. The places where you go are the Marthasvilles. The places where the Peace Foundation goes are the Marthasville of the 21st century. But God has an Atlanta plan. And the bones shall not only live, but there'll be an army. God bless you.